Welcome again, dear students. I am Dr. Kaleem Ahmed, Assistant Professor, Department of Wildlife Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. In the last lecture, we discussed the first 6 chapters of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Now, in today's lecture, we will discuss the remaining 6 chapters of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Let's start from chapter 7. Chapter 7 actually talks about National Biodiversity Fund. A National Biodiversity Funds will be established, and the purpose of the funds include to receive grants and loans from the central government, and to receive charges and the royalties, and to receive other additional sums from other sources as actually decided by the central government. The fund will also be used for we can say providing benefit to the claimers for conservation and promotion of the biological resources, and socio-economic development of the areas where we can say the biological resources are assessed in consultation with the local bodies. And actually it is mandatory for the National Biodiversity Authority that they need to prepare an annual report detailing its activities for the previous financial years. The report along with the edited copy of the accounts needs to be submitted to the central government by the prescribed dates. Another is chapter 8. Chapter 8 actually talks about the state biodiversity funds. The state biodiversity funds will also be established, or there is need to establish state biodiversity funds, and the purpose of these funds includes to receive, just like national biodiversity funds, it's also the purpose is same, to receive grants and loans from the state governments and the National Biodiversity Authority, to receive sums from the other sources as decided by the state governments, and the funds will be used for managing and conserving heritage sites, for compensating or rehabilitating affected communities, and for promoting conservation and biological resources. And also this fund can also be used for socio-economic development in areas where resources are assessed in consultation with the local bodies. Similar to we can say National Biodiversity Fund, the state biodiversity boards needs to prepare an annual report detailing activities for the previous years, and they need to submit that particular report to the state government. Let's talk about the chapter 9. Chapter 9 actually talks about the central government duties in biodiversity conservations. So the central government is actually responsible for developing national strategies, plans, and programs that actually aimed at the conservation and sustainable use of the biological diversity. So these plans or these strategies are we can say includes we can say identifying and monitoring areas that are actually rich in biological resources, and these plans also include promoting both in situ and ex situ conservations. It means in the natural habitat as well as the outside the natural habitat for the conservations. And the plan also needs to include incentivizing the research, training, and public educations to raise awareness about the biodiversity conservations. Chapter 9 also emphasize that if central governments finds that an area are rich in biological diversity is threatened by some kind of overuse or neglect, it can issue some kind of the directions to the concerned state government to take corrective actions, offering technical and other assistance where needed. The central government also aims to integrate the conservation of the biodiversity into relevant sectoral plans and the policies. It will also assess we can say the environmental impacts of the projects likely to affect the biodiversity of that particular areas, and then they need to regulate the risk associated with the biotechnology, we can say particularly in relation to living modified organism LMOs. Additionally, we can say the central government needs to protect and respect the traditional knowledge of the local peoples related to biodiversity with measures such as registering such kind of the knowledge at local, state or national levels. Chapter 9 also talk about the biodiversity heritage sites. State government, we can say in consultation with the local bodies, may notify any area of biodiversity importance as biodiversity heritage sites. The state government must also develop schemes to compensate or to rehabilitate peoples actually affected by these designations. We can say they needs in consultation with the, we can say, central government, they can also frame rules for the management and the conservation of these sites. This chapters 9 also talk about the, we can say, threatened species. The central government, we can say, in consultation with the state government, can notify any species that is on the verge of extinctions or likely to become extinct as threatened species. So, this includes, we can say, measures like prohibiting or regulating the collection of such species and taking step to preserve that particular species. This chapter 9 also talk about designation of repositories. The central government may designate institutions as the repositories for biological resources in consultation with the National Biodiversity Authority. These institutions will actually store biological materials including vouchers, specimens, or we can say any newly discovered taxa needs to be deposited with these repositories, ensuring proper conservation and documentations. And this chapter also talks about some exemption provisions. The central governments may also declare in consultation with the National Biodiversity Authority that certain items, we can say including biological resources typically traded as a commodities, will be exempt from the provision of this particular act. Let's talk about the chapter 10 of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Chapter 10 actually talks about the constitution of Biodiversity Management Committees. Under section 41 of the this act, this Biological Diversity Act, every local body is required to establish biodiversity management committees within its jurisdictions. Actually the purpose of these committees is to promote the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. The key functions of these committees includes conservation of the habitats and the ecosystems in their jurisdictions, preservation of the genetic diversity such as land races, folk varieties, cultivars and domesticated animal breeds. And they also need to report the traditional knowledge that actually related to the biodiversity, including, we can say, agriculture and medicinal practices. So, the definitions actually relevant to the biodiversity management committees includes cultivars. Cultivars, any plant variety that has been specifically bred or cultivated, and other things that has been there in BMC, biodiversity management committee, is folk variety. A cultivated plant variety traditionally grown and exchanged by the farmers. Another term or another things that is there in the biodiversity management committee is landruns, a traditional plant variety that actually developed by the ancient farmers and their successors. Chapter 10 also talk about the role of the Biodiversity Management Committee. The national, we can say, Biodiversity Authority and the state biodiversity boards actually required to concern the biodiversity management committees. When making any kind of the decisions related to the use of the biological resources and associated knowledge within the jurisdiction of biodiversity management committees. So actually these kind of things ensure that the local conservation efforts are considered when formulating national and the state level policies. Chapter 10 also talks about levying charges for commercial use. Biodiversity actually management committees are also empowered to levy charges for commercial collections or access to the biological resources found within their territorial area. These fees serves as a mechanism for regulating access to the biological resources and ensuring that the local communities benefit from the use of their biodiversity. The fees actually that can be collected are used for conservation efforts and the sustainable management of the local resources. Overall, we can say the establishment of the Biodiversity Management Committee aims is to decentralize the management of the biodiversity and empowering the grassroots levels of the management or empowering the local bodies to actively participate in sustainable use and conservation efforts while also benefiting from the resources generating from their areas. Chapter 11 talks about, we can say, grants to the local biodiversity fund. The state government actually is authorized to allocate funds to the local biodiversity fund. These funds are actually made available through grants or loans as determined by the state legislatures to support activities that actually outlined in the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. The funds are also used specifically for the conservation and the promotion of the biodiversity within the local jurisdictions of the Biodiversity Management Committees. This chapter 11 also talk about the constitution of the local biodiversity fund. Under, we can say, section 43, a local biodiversity funds needs to be established in areas where institutions of the self-government are active. The purpose of these funds includes to receive grants and loans from the state government and to receive contributions from the National Biodiversity Authority and the state biodiversity boards. And it also includes to collect fees by Biodiversity Management Committees as per section 41 of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. And this also includes to collect any additional sums as designated by the state government for Biodiversity Management Committees. The fund is, we can say, is critical mechanism for ensuring local control and funding for biodiversity related activities within the community. Chapter 11 also talk about the management and custody of the fund. The state government is actually responsible for prescribing the rules for managing the local biodiversity funds as actually outlined in section 44 of Biological Diversity Act. These funds can be used for the conservation and the promotion of the biodiversity within the local bodies jurisdictions, and it also ensures that the use of those funds aligns with the principles of the biodiversity conservation. So, the government or the governance of these funds actually ensure that the local funds can be managed and apply resources in a manner that is sustainable and beneficial to both the environment and the community. Chapter 11 also talks about annual report and the financial oversights. The person in charge actually of the local biodiversity fund needs to prepare an annual reports detailing the activities undertaken during the previous financial year. This report needs to be submitted to the concerned local bodies for review as per section 45 of Biological Diversity Act. Additionally, we can say the accounts of the funds needs to be audited in consultation with the Accountant General of the state. The audited account and the audited report needs to be submitted to the local body by the prescribed deadline under section 46 of the Biological Diversity Act. So, these things actually ensure some kind of financial transparency and accountability in the management of the funds that actually allocated for the biodiversity conservation at the local level. Chapter 11 also talk about the submission of all these things to the district magistrate. According to section 47 of the Biological Diversity Act, the Biodiversity Management Committee established under section 41 is required to submit the annual report and audited accounts to the district magistrate who has a jurisdictions over the area. This create, we can say, some kind of the systems of the check and the balance to ensure that the local bodies and their respective committees are compliant with the provision of the Biological Diversity Act, and that the funds are used appropriately for biodiversity conservation efforts. We can say that overall this chapter 11 talks about the local biodiversity fund. The local biodiversity funds actually serves as a vital tool for ensuring that the biodiversity conservation is supported financially at the local level through grants, loans, and the fees. The funds actually ensures that the local bodies have a resources to manage and the conserve biodiversity at the local level. The system of, we can say, annual reports, audited accounts, and the oversight by the district magistrates actually give some kind of the guarantees of transparency and effective use of these funds that actually help to align local conservation efforts with the broader goals of the sustainable biodiversity management. Let's talk about the last chapter of this Biological Diversity Act of 2002. This, we can say, chapter 12 talks about the miscellaneous items that actually have not been covered in the previous 11 chapters. So this chapter says that National Biodiversity Authority must follow the policy directions as actually provided by the central government. The central government has a, we can say, final say in determining whether a matter pertains to the policy or not. The National Biodiversity Authority will be consulted for all these things before, we can say, these directives are issued as far as possible. Similarly, as we can say, state biodiversity boards also need to adhere to the policy directives given by the state government. The state government decisions on the policy matter is actually final, and the state biodiversity boards will be given some kind of the opportunity to express its views before such directions are actually issued. This chapter actually also talk about the dispute settlements between authorities. If a dispute arises between the National Biodiversity Authority and state biodiversity boards, either party can appeal to the central government. The appeal needs to be submitted in a prescribed form as given in the Biological Diversity Act of 2002, and that will be processed according to the prescribed procedures. The parties also be given an opportunity to hear about the appeal is resolved. If a dispute actually occurs between the state biodiversity boards, then the matter will be referred to the National Biodiversity Authority for the resolutions. The National Biodiversity Authority will follow all the principle of the natural justice in resolving the dispute. And let's discuss what are the powers of the National Biodiversity Authority in dispute resolutions. The National Biodiversity Authority has civil court-like powers, including summoning witness, requiring the production of the documents, and issuing commissions to examine evidences. And let's talk about what is the legal status of the National Biodiversity Authority and the State Biodiversity Board members. Members and the employees of, we can say, National Biodiversity Authority and State Biodiversity Boards are considered public servants under the Indian Penal Code when acting in accordance with the provision of the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. So can someone appeals against the National Biodiversity Authority and State Biodiversity orders? There is also, these things have been given in these miscellaneous chapters, that the persons aggrieved by the decisions related to the benefit sharing or the orders of the National Biodiversity Authority or the State Biodiversity Boards, they can appeal to the High Court within 30 days. We can say after the commencement of the National Green Tribunal Act of 2010, the applicant can also appeal or file a case with National Green Tribunal. What are the penalties for the violations? These things are also being discussed in chapter 12. Anyone who disobeys key section of the Act, such as section 3, 4 or 6, may face imprisonment up to 5 years or a fine up to 10 lakhs. In case of the significant environment damage, the fine may be increased. So, what are the penalties for the violation of the directions? These things are also discussed. Violating any directions or the orders that are actually issued by the central or the state governments or the National Biodiversity Authority or the state biodiversity boards may incur a fine up to 1 lakh rupees with an increased fine for repeated or continuous offences. So, let us discuss what are the penalties for corporate offences. So, if any company actually violates this Biodiversity Act, both the company and the responsible individuals such as directors or the managers may be held liable. The company may be punished unless the individuals proves due diligence. So, let us talk about what are the cognizable and non-bailable offences. These things are also discussed in chapter 12 of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Offences actually under the act are cognizable and non-bailable, which means they are serious offences and that law enforcement can investigate without a warrant. These acts work in combination, we can say, with the other environmental laws concerning forest or wildlife and does not override them, just like we can say Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The central government may direct any state government on how to implement the provision of this Biological Diversity Act, ensuring some kind of the uniform executions across all the states of the India. How can makes the rules? The central actually government has the authority to make rules to implement these acts, including defining the roles of the National Biodiversity Authority, chairpersons and the members, application process and the appeal procedures. Similarly, we can say the state government can make rules related to the functions of the State Biodiversity Board, the management of the biodiversity funds and the auditing of the accounts. We can say both the central as well as the state government must lay any new rules before parliament or the state legislatures for the approval. We can conclude this Biological Diversity Act by saying that this act is crucial for biodiversity conservation, as it ensures, we can say, the sustainable use of the biological resources while protecting the indigenous knowledge and the rights of the local communities. It also, we can say, facilitates the conservation of the ecosystems, species and genetic diversity by regulating access to the biological resources and promoting equitable sharing of benefits arising from their use. The acts or these legislations also empower local bodies to create biodiversity management committees, fostering, we can say, community participations in biodiversity conservation efforts. Additionally, we can also say that this act also emphasizes the protection of the threatened species, prohibits biopiracy and supports research initiatives, thereby we can say contributing to the preservation of the India's rich biodiversity and promoting its sustainable utilization for present as well as for future generation. With this, dear students, we end today's lecture, and in the next lecture we will continue to discuss some new interesting topic. Thank you.